Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Gostola, managing editor for Shadowproof.com, and welcome to the Dissenter Weekly for April 22nd, 2021. Uh, Sorry that I wasn't here last week. I wasn't feeling that well, so we're going to pick up where we left off a couple weeks ago. There's one story from last week that we're going to visit, and all the other stories are from the past week. But before we get to them, Brian, like always, has a few housekeeping items for you.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you, Kevin, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I just want to remind you, as always, to make sure that you are subscribed wherever you're watching or liking or following us so that you keep up to date on this show, as well as the stories that we publish each week at Shadowproof. And you can help us publish those stories and keep the website going and fund Kevin's work. We'll talk about it at the end of the show, but dissenter.substack.com is Kevin's newsletter, and you can go to shadowproof.com/donate to see our donation and membership options. So let's dive right in here with our first story. We have police take British oil industry whistleblower to psychiatric hospital against his will. What is this first story?
All right. So in July of 2020, Jonathan Taylor was arrested in Croatia after an Interpol red license from Monaco on bribery and corruption charges was issued. Taylor is a British whistleblower who provided evidence against the Dutch oil firm, SBM Offshore in 2012, which had employed him. And as the Index on Censorship summarizes, Taylor exposed a quote, multi-million dollar network of bribery payments made by SBM around the world and cooperated with prosecutors in the UK, the United States, Brazil, and the Netherlands. Investigations resulted in fines against the company to the tune of $827 million and the conviction of two former CEOs of SBM for fraud-related offenses. And now Monaco is targeting him. And last year, Mr. Taylor responded to the UK government's refusal to intervene on his behalf, saying, the way I'm treated by the government, whereby it's choosing to knowingly sit on its hands and not get involved when it's been invited to get involved, is utterly beyond all logical conclusion, and I am beyond myself bewildered. And so we have a British citizen who's facing extradition, who the UK government is utterly failing, and the Index on Censorship reports that days ago, Taylor alerted the British Embassy and the Sofia-based regional council about his deteriorating mental health and was asked to put his thoughts into writing, which set off a train of events in Zagreb that Jonathan Taylor related. And so I'm going to read, these are his own words. This is Jonathan Taylor's description of what he went through. I was met by two armed officers at the roadside to the entrance of the forecourt to my apartment at about 9:15 p.m. last night. I was told I had to wait with them until a psychiatrist arrived in an ambulance. After about 45 minutes, we went up to my apartment as it had started raining and the ambulance still had not arrived. At about 10:15 p.m., the ambulance drivers arrived and joined the two policemen in my apartment. I was then told I had to accompany them to hospital. I protested, stating I had been told a psychiatrist would come to me. I made it clear I was not prepared to leave the apartment. Then, four more other armed officers arrived. I again explained I was not happy to go to the hospital. Eventually, two of the armed officers manhandled me to the ground, causing my head to hit a wall and, as a result, a headache. I was then cuffed with my face against the floor and manhandled out of my apartment into an ambulance where I was strapped into a stretcher. Upon arrival at the hospital, no idea where I am, I was dragged out of the ambulance and sat on a chair just inside the door to the hospital. I was left there under guard, handcuffed still for about 30 minutes. A lady came to see me, apparently a psychiatrist, but she did not introduce herself. And she asked a few basic questions like, why did I arrive with the police? How long had they been following me? Shortly after this, I was taken to a room, still cuffed, where I was strapped to a bed by my feet and legs and my hands. I then refused unidentified tablets and was invited to swallow them whilst someone held a cup of water to my mouth. I refused. I was then forcibly turned and something was injected into my upper thigh. It was now at least 12:30 a.m. At about 6:30 a.m., again against my will, I had a further injection. Another psychiatrist came to see me at about 10:15, and she determined I could go. A smiling male nurse has just prodded my arm, saying, "Everything will be okay. Don't hate Croatia now." I've just discovered that I am at the University Hospital, Vrapta. What to say? Where I was looking for help, I got one of the worst 12-hour experiences of my life. And this is all happening within an extradition case that Jonathan Taylor is facing with these charges that seem clearly political. And as the Index on Censorship and some other organizations have called attention to this case, are pointing out, clearly linked to his whistleblowing.
Thank you, Kevin. Fascinating story. I really appreciate you bringing that one to us this week. Our next story, we have a Facebook whistleblower exposes inconsistent handling of suspicious accounts in various countries. What do you have here?
Sophie Zhang is the whistleblower, the subject of this headline. She was hired in January 2018 to work for a unit at Facebook that was established to combat quote unquote fake engagement, whether that would involve likes, comments, shares, or reactions by suspicious accounts. After about 6 months, Julia Carey Wong reports Zhang noticed that, quote, Juan Orlando Hernandez, the president of Honduras, was amassing large numbers of fake likes on the content he posted to his 500,000 followers on Facebook over one 6-week period from June to July 2018. Hernandez's Facebook posts received likes from 59,100 users, more than 78% of which were not real people. And this story goes on. I'm going to read an excerpt here from this so people get the full picture of the extent of this fake engagement. It stood out to Sophie not because of the volume, but because of an apparent innovation in how he acquired it. As Julia Carey Wong explains, most fake likes on Facebook come from fake or compromised user accounts, but Hernandez was receiving thousands of likes from Facebook pages. These were profiles for businesses, organizations, or public figures that had been set up to resemble user accounts with names, profile pictures, and job titles. One individual was the administrator for hundreds of those fake pages, as well as for the official pages of both Hernandez and his late sister, who was the communications minister. Sitting behind a computer screen, the administrator could publish a post about how well Hernandez was doing his job on the president's Facebook page, then use his hundreds of dummy pages to make the post appear popular, the digital equivalent of bussing in a fake crowd for a speech. Those are all Julia Carey Wong's words. So this is the sort of fake engagement that Zhang or Sophie brought to the attention of Facebook management. She believed she had been hired to stop and prevent this utilization of suspicious accounts, which, by the way, seem to resemble the kind of interference or suspicious activity that we'd seen breathlessly reported on when it was linked to Russian-backed groups. Yet when she brought the Honduras network to Facebook management, there was little interest in policing this activity. Again, I'll read a relevant excerpt from this. It's an exceptional report. I encourage people to go read the full article, which is how Facebook how Facebook let fake engagement distort global politics, a whistleblower's account. there's a lot of detail in it, but this is the reaction. Quote, "It's not for threat intel to investigate fake engagement," end quote, an investigator from that team told Zhang. Katie Harbath, Facebook's then public policy director for global elections, expressed interest in a, quote, "scaled way to look for this and action on other politician pages," end quote, but noted that it was unlikely the case would get much attention outside Honduras and that she didn't, quote, "feel super strongly," end quote, about it. Other executives and managers Zhang briefed included Samid Chakrabarti, the then head of civic integrity, David Agranovich, the global threat disruption lead, and then a vice president of integrity at Facebook. So just to be clear, Hernandez is a right-wing nationalist. He supported the military coup that took place in 2009. This was a coup that happened while President Barack Obama was in office. They ended up embracing this outcome. They didn't do anything to fight it. This is something that was connected to Hillary Clinton's time as a Secretary of State. Wong was then reelected in 2017 as, Hernandez was reelected in 2017 as Wong notes, and that was believed to be marred by fraudulent activity. He's responsible for systematic human rights abuses, not to mention is accused of involvement in drug trafficking. So what this whistleblowing from Sophie Zhang and this exceptional report from Julia Carey Wong show in thorough detail is also not limited to Honduras. There are suspicious accounts that are written about in this report from Azerbaijan, and that inaction is said to have deeply troubled Sophie. And then there are networks of suspicious accounts in Bolivia, Ecuador, Brazil, Iraq, India, and Mexico. But each of these examples, it was hard to convince Facebook management that they needed to prioritize using their resources to take these suspicious networks, which to me illustrates how this policy around so-called social media manipulation by governments is dependent on United States foreign policy and which of these countries are on America's official enemies list. You'll notice what countries are missing. They don't have any problem drumming up resources and energy to respond to China or Russia or Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Syria, etc. All of these countries are where social media companies will go above and beyond to respond to networks of suspicious accounts. And as for any client states that exist to maintain America's empire, they're to be tolerated by users even as they poison democracy, which is why there's a hesitation on the part of Honduras when you back the coup and when you support the direction or have to, you've backed yourself into a corner where you have to support the outcome there, no matter what its consequences may be to human lives, then the suspicious networks are going to be allowed because there's no interest from the U.S. government in cracking down upon them. A lot of this social media activity that the Facebook has decided it needs to police is activity that agencies within the U.S. government and other Western governments want dealt with.
Thank you, Kevin. Very thorough. Let's go on to our next story here. We have whistleblower accuses anti-gun police unit in D.C. of fabricating charges. What is this story?
Yeah, so this comes from The Appeal, and I'm going to go to just part of the story. Well, it's the whole entire story is built around a veteran D.C. police officer who exposes some of the conduct of this gun recovery unit within the Metropolitan Police Department. But there's a letter here that is written about a mention of a whistleblower that the Appeal spoke with this veteran who said they were moved to call attention to the way that police were violating the rights of DC residents, especially young Black men whose lives are being ruined by gun charges, and requested an anonymity out of fear of retaliation. So we don't know who this person is, but there is also a mention that there was a case last year involving a whistleblower who was retaliated against after they blew the whistle on department abuses that included narcotics division supervisors instructing officers to target young Black men in low-income neighborhoods for jump outs and reclassifying felonies as misdemeanors in order to improve crime statistics. And so this disclosure, this thing that this veteran is speaking to anonymously, is along those lines. And by the way, that was Sergeant Charlotte Josu, who filed a lawsuit last year, a whistleblower lawsuit. So this veteran wrote that the leadership's focus on this anti-gun unit is stat-driven. Leadership focuses on how many guns they can recover, and if an arrest was made with the recovery, there's little interest, if any, review. There's very little, if any, review of how the gun was recovered or how the arrest was made. And then it continues to describe this dubious tactic that's employed, that members of this unit will drive up to an area where multiple people are hanging out. They'll jump out of the truck. They'll force everyone present to submit to stop and frisks without any articulable reason for being stopped and frisked. And as it opens at the beginning, there's a story that illustrates the way that this goes down. And then there's mention here of how a judge has ordered the release of stop data. And so some of this is along the lines of what we know from cities like New York, where the stop and frisk regime received a lot of attention under New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg. And so a lot of this is very familiar, the way that people are treated. But the example at the beginning, just what this vet is, really upset and aghast at seeing in their work, is just this idea that basically cops will come up to an individual, will ask him if they'll ask a young Black man, for example, do you have any weapons on you? They say no, and tell them that actually they have marijuana, which you're allowed to now have in small amounts in DC. Then the cops will claim to hear something in their backpacks. Then there'll be a pat down, and then they'll take the backpacks and claim they found a gun. And then there'll be a plea deal offered. And if you're scared enough, maybe you'll take the plea deal and you'll be sentenced for something you didn't do. But if you refuse to plead guilty, then the police will recognize they had no justifiable reason for the stop, let alone to search, and everything about the case will fall apart, and you'll suddenly find that prosecutors are dropping gun charges against you. So it was all a ruse and as this veteran suggested, it's just a way to pad statistics and justify the everyday operations of police.
Thank you, Kevin. We're going to move over to Hawaii's police. Look at the Honolulu police, where they spent $150,000 in COVID relief funds on a robotic dog. What is this story?
Yeah, you're going to pull this up just for everyone who can see. This is the Boston Dynamics dog. That's pretty infamous on the internet, especially as it looks like one of those dystopian creations that's definitely going to be terrorizing all of us in our bleak future, as if it isn't already bleak for us now, but in the even worse post-pandemic, post-apocalyptic future. And that the Honolulu Police Department here spent $150,000 on a robot, just so an officer could call it a toy. I love this line. This is in the this wonderful engineering post here. Just this person writes, they spent $150,000 on a robot for an officer to call it a toy. So this is Spot, the robot dog, coming out of the $40 million CARE Act cash fund. They bought this and claimed it could be used to respond to the pandemic. But there's criticism here, and we have a officer who declined to be named, but anonymously said that they could think of a lot better things to purchase, and spoke out against the purchase of this toy. I mean, they called it a toy. And so here you go. This is what we have. They said it could do field screenings. It could interact with homeless people who were self-quarantining. So that's their justification. But as it seems, it's pretty obscene to people who have been going through economic hardship. There's one mother from Hawaii, or probably the Honolulu area, who says it's absolutely ridiculous. She struggled to get rental assistance. Her husband's lost, and her have both lost their jobs. I could think of a lot better things to do with that money. It seems like people are taking temperatures everywhere. They don't need robots to do it, which is true. So there's a pretty glaring example of abuse of taxpayer funds.
Definitely. Our last story here that you have for us, we have the U.S. Geological Survey whistleblower who faced retaliation, has their job restored. What is this?
Yeah, I'm not sure I got a chance to cover this on the Dissenter Weekly. So I'm coming to this on as we reach a resolution, or quasi-resolution. There are a couple open questions that are pointed to by the Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, but they mentioned that this U.S. Geological Survey whistleblower was a microbiologist who was in charge of dealing with biosafety failures who had exposed that biosafety failures in its wildlife disease laboratories were endangering the public, that they are going to be allowed to return to their job at a Seattle-based Western Fisheries Research Center that conducts its work under the auspices of the U.S. government, this Geological Survey agency that I'm sure a lot of people don't even know exists. So this is a good outcome. Doesn't happen all of the time. Essentially, what happened is Evelyn Emenegger, who was at this laboratory, worked there for more than 28 years. She had filed a complaint that accused them of failing to address problems that led to a 6-month period where the lab had been releasing pathogen contaminated wastewater into wetland areas that adjoin one of Seattle's most popular parks around Lake Washington. And then the complaint was dismissed, and the supervisor tried to remove her based on some alleged lapses. Anytime you see these kinds of stories, they look for some kind of technicality to trigger your removal or suspension from an agency. It was, as the peer general counsel Paula Dinerstein says, it was textbook example of whistleblower retaliation. So now we have what appears to be vindication, and she had risked her career, and so ultimately she'll be able to return. But it was kind of odd. This was an abrupt decision. There was no communication. There was just like a withdrawal of the action that was being targeted against her. And then now she'll be able to return, but it's kind of unclear what the terms of the return will be, which the fuzzy details are fairly common, I would think if you do actually see the U.S. government abandon their case against you, then they don't really want to admit too much responsibility. And so I think the leaving it up in the air as to like how she's going to be able to come back to the Geological Survey Agency is just part of this accountability crisis that is a systemic problem in our government, where someone who's a whistleblower challenges them. They know they were called out. They tried to remove this person because they didn't want to deal with the problem, but they can't get away with removing her from her job. So they want her to just return as quietly as possible. And they don't really want to talk about what happened. And they want to just put it under the rug and hope that things can just move on without people dealing with the grievances here. And I don't know if that's going to be something that Evelyn Emenegger allows, but it's really going to lie with the whistleblower here on how much this goes forward, because it does seem like USGS is ready to be over with it. So I don't think there's something called a Merit System Protection Board that will hear these cases, and they're administrative. This is outside of the U.S. court system, and I don't think that had fully run its course before that kind of tribunal or advisory body. So this is the best possible outcome for her, but then it also can be kind of upsetting, because there are some aspects of the way the government handles itself that I don't know how much of an apology you're going to receive, but you do get your job back.
Thanks, Kevin. Why don't we wrap up here? Give us a little bit of an update on Julian Assange, and then if you want to tell folks about the newsletter, that would be great.
Yeah, so the update is simply that we're still waiting to hear from the High Court of Justice as to whether they will review the appeal. I can't think of why they wouldn't hear the appeal, but we have a cross appeal. We have an appeal where the U.S. government filed its paperwork and said what grounds they think they need to challenge the decision, and it's going to be on those narrow grounds related to how Julian Assange would be treated if he was extradited to the United States and held in a prison during pre-trial detention, or if he was convicted, how he would be incarcerated in a maximum security prison. And so there's that. And then the other side of it is that Assange's legal team has submitted an appeal that challenges the way the district court judge ruled, without acknowledging that there were press freedom issues, without acknowledging that Julian Assange shouldn't be targeted in this manner because he was engaged in journalistic activity, and that the precedent of this decision would be bad for journalism if it's allowed to stand. And we now wait for any news from the High Court of Justice as to when or whether they will hear this review. Logically, there would be a hearing at some point this year, if not the first part of next year. And I remind you that we have Julian Assange in Belmarsh high security prison now for more than 2 years, and has survived COVID outbreaks and denied bail, not allowed to be on house arrest with his family, his partner, and his 2 children. And so there is a desire to see this resolve as quickly as possible. And also, I don't know, what kind of plans there might be to challenge bail at the appeal level. But the High Court of Justice probably has to agree to review the appeal first before there can be anything done about his predicament in detention. So we have a joint statement, too, from an international symposium of parliamentarians that basically these are 40 politicians from around the world, just saying very specifically that Julian Assange faces charges in the U.S., which could result in a prison sentence of up to 175 years, that they're deeply concerned. And in January, the Westminster Magistrates Court rightly dismissed the United States extradition case against Julian Assange, but yet he's in this high security prison. They go on to say that the U.S. is attempting to reverse the finding of the Westminster Magistrates Court, despite the judge's clear ruling that Julian Assange's life would be at risk were he committed to the brutality of the U.S. prison system. And then they describe the threats to freedom of the press and urgently ask Joe Biden and his administration to drop the prosecution, and request that the British government review the extradition request and take urgent action. But as you know from the story we started out with today, the British government seems incapable of standing up for anyone who is vulnerable to human rights abuses as a result of a government their extradition for a political case. Even Monaco Monaco, they won't stand up to and say they're going to protect their citizen from being abused. This is a different case because Julian Assange is an Australian. So it's a lot easier for them to pretend like they have no obligation to do anything for him, even though they make pronouncements about freedom of expression that are undermined deeply by how he is being held in the Belmarsh prison and how they've allowed this political case to fester. So with that, I thank you all for tuning into this show. We need to wrap. This is the newsletter down here, the dissenter.substack.com. You can subscribe, and there's a promotion there right now that I'm doing. I'm trying to do where you get $2 off for the first 3 months if you sign up for it. So go over there, become a monthly subscriber, support this journalism every month. I do my best to stay on top of whistleblower stories, and we have exclusive postings for people. Recently, I did a bit of a reply to a column that the Intercept's national security correspondent, James Risen, had this column that he wrote about how the press in general needs to do more to protect whistleblowers from retaliation. And then I point out that this seems to be a way of covering and deflecting responsibility for things that are going on at the Intercept. And I dig into that very respectfully, and I don't
It's a great piece.
discount, but just, I leave that for people who are subscribers of the newsletter. It is not currently available to just the general public. Maybe I'll make it available to everyone depending on how far this goes. But I just point out a couple things related to the Reality Winner example and what's happened with Daniel Hale, the drone whistleblower, as well as some parts of James Risen's background that are relevant to the piece which he wrote, but he did not describe. So with that, I just say, and related to the newsletter, there's I can announce that I'm in a bit of a transition phase. So if it seems slow over there, we're working on giving the newsletter its own site and probably moving away from Substack in a way, because where we're going to move will have more tools and utilities and things that we can use in order to build out this newsletter and bring on voices and I think grow its base of supporters. So I just say that to you. If you feel like it's slowed down, if you think there's not enough happening with it, just be patient with me. It should be back to being the same kind of a newsletter that it was a month ago, after we sort out some of the things that are being worked on behind the scenes right now. So thank you. And thank you to Brian for helping to lead me through the show.
Thank you.
And I should be here next week, but there may be an interruption and probably a week off the first Thursday of May. There's probably not going to be a show, but come back and see us and hear about whistleblower stories next week on April 29th.
Yep. Thank you, Kevin. And definitely keep an eye on Shadowproof. We'll keep publishing there. We have a bunch of really wonderful freelance stories that we have been publishing over the last couple weeks and that we have wrapping up right now, and we hope to publish over the next couple weeks. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you for subscribing and following wherever you are. And if you want to support us, sign up for Kevin's newsletter there, or go to shadowproof.com/donate and chip in. Have a great weekend. Thank you.